Good evening to you. Merthyr Tydfil. Great spot if you like your history, site of the world's first steam railway, and once the iron capital of the world. A good place if you're interested in political revolt as well. 1831, the Merthyr Uprising pitted coal miners against the owners, and it all got a bit bloody. Well, what about modern politics? Solid Labour. Now, all these things make it an interesting place for the Reform Party to have chosen to launch its so-called contract with the British people, effectively its manifesto, earlier today. But this was not a party predicting electoral success now.
Our aim and our ambition is to establish a bridgehead in Parliament and to become a real opposition to a Labour government.
And at this point, many of you will be saying, in that case, why give them any kind of platform? They're just troublemakers, and they've got some really nasty people as candidates. Ignore them, they don't matter, and they'll go away. Well, I think you're absolutely wrong, and I'm going to explain why. Under Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, Reform are polling well. One new poll today has them up at 18 points, level pegging with the Tories. And that means they could be responsible for the Conservatives losing a huge number of extra seats and therefore giving Labour that supermajority in the next Commons. Already tonight, Tory Central Office are warning of Labour being in power not for 5 years, but for a generation. So that makes them important. But second point, if they get the support of around a fifth of voters, and that is not impossible by any means, then they may well be in second place in a lot of Labour constituencies as well. And given their strong views on immigration, climate change and tax cuts, that might affect how Labour MPs think, and therefore what a Labour government would actually do. Anyway, earlier on I caught up with Richard Tice, the former leader of Reform UK, now its chairman, and I challenged him on the huge amount of money, 30 billion quid a year, he says could be saved by scrapping net zero. But does this mean he doesn't believe in man-made climate change at all?
Of course, climate change is happening. It's gone on for millions of years, and it will continue.
I mean, the dramatic.
No one's denying that.
Sure,
the question is, Andrew,
dramatic recent climate change.
The question is. Yeah, and the climate goes through cycles of rapidly changing and then pausing for a while. Look,
so
the
that's
point
not
is,
man-made.
what you do about it, do you adapt to it? Hang on, do you adapt to it, or do you think you can stop it? You can't stop the power of the sun. You can't stop the power of volcanoes. You can't stop multi-decadal sea level oscillation. And the proof is in the pudding. The IPCC itself, in its 6th annual report, says even if you got to net zero tomorrow, it'll make no difference to sea level rise for between 200 and 1,000 years. Much cheaper to adapt to it. And no one talked about the cost, for example. Where I'm standing, we're going to build thousands and thousands of pylons in constituencies across Lincolnshire, blighting the countryside, blighting the environment. No one talked about this cost. That's the reality. It's billions and billions of pounds a year. So listening to you closely, Richard, you don't believe that climate change at this moment is man-made? That's not what I said at all. I said climate change is real. Of course, man-made CO2 emissions, probably they contribute a bit. There's a scientific debate about what percentage. Is it 3%? Is it 5%? I think I would say it's probably less than 10%. So we're not saying it's not real. I'm not saying don't use technology to reduce harmful emissions. All of that is good stuff. What you can't do is impoverish a nation and make the lowest paid suffer the most and export CO2 emissions to a different part of the world. If you're worried about global climate change, but CO2 emissions elsewhere in the world are rising much, much more, then you're not making any difference at all. All you're doing is killing our jobs, killing our community, our steel and automotive communities, and frankly, you're killing old people who can't afford their heating bills. It's madness. To put it very, very simply, the majority of scientists who look at this would say that the way mankind is behaving at the moment and the amount of stuff that we are pumping into the atmosphere is causing an unsustainable, irreversible form of climate change which will be catastrophic for the planet. And what I'm not really sure is whether you agree with that or not. There are also thousands and thousands of scientists who fundamentally disagree with that. So you don't? Yes, we can use technology to reduce harmful emissions. Well, I'm on the side, actually, of ordinary people in the United Kingdom who should not be made to feel much poorer pursuing targets that will make no difference because elsewhere in the world, far more CO2 emissions are being created, man-made CO2 emissions, than we are reducing. There's no point impoverishing ourselves, making ourselves poorer, if actually all you're doing is enriching people elsewhere in the world.
If man-made climate change in our time is real and is caused by emissions, how do you think people in Britain should help stop it?
We should use smart technology, which is evolving all the time. For example, I've got an electric car, but it's got to be affordable. You cannot say to people that we're going to make your life worse off, we're going to stop you enjoying the things that you've enjoyed, you're not going to be able to afford to heat your homes, and by the way, elsewhere in the world, they're not doing anything about it at all, but you've got to suffer. That is madness. It's not sustainable, and all it's doing is exporting our jobs and our money for no sensible reason whatsoever.
So you would say keep pumping oil, keep burning gas, where necessary, keep burning coal, frack and all the rest of it, even though most scientists say that is a recipe for disaster.
It's not a recipe for disaster, and the truth is that's what's happening elsewhere in the world. We've got all this energy treasure, and we should be using our energy treasure so that we actually that we can make life better for our own people, ensure our own prosperity, as opposed to sending our jobs and our money overseas. That is economic madness, and it's not going to make any difference whatsoever to the issue of global climate change, which, as I repeat, climate change has gone on for millions of years. It always will.
But you know, and I know, that the climate change we are undergoing at the moment, which is having such a dramatic effect around the equator and therefore driving migration and as well on the poles and driving sea level changes, that is new and that is caused by us. And around the world, people are saying we have to do something about it.
Andrew, I'm sorry. Andrew, it's not new. It's been going on for millions of years. We are being lied to. We're being misled. And the smart way to deal with climate change is to use technology to adapt to it, rather than try and pretend you can stop the power of the sun,
Richard,
stop the power of volcanoes. You cannot.
Who do you think is lying to us about climate change?
Oh, there are vast vested interests who are making huge sums of money as ordinary people are being improvised.
Which vested interests? Who are we talking about?
Oh, there are vast big corporations. Look,
Which
for example,
ones?
at the developers,
most of the big
developers of the wind turbines. Hang on. Well, if you're going to ask me a question, please let me answer. There are huge corporations making massive amounts of money out of offshore wind farms. People like Drax, for example, with the power station, the biomass power station in Yorkshire, making vast profits, massive subsidies, not making any difference to CO2 emissions whatsoever. We're being lied to, for example, about that. And so the list goes on. Solar farms, consuming the British countryside. It's completely absurd to use productive agricultural land for solar farms. That's not creating lots of British jobs. You're buying lots of solar panels that are made elsewhere, for example, in China, using cheap coal-fired power stations to produce them.
We could learn to make our own, of course. And in terms of the big corporations,
I've talked about that before. I'd love to, but you can only do that. You can only do that with cheap energy, and we haven't got cheap energy. We've got the most expensive electricity in the developed world, and there is a direct link between the growth in our renewable energy capacity and the growth in our electricity prices. And it requires someone like Reform UK and me to tell it as it is, that the reality is that the more we pursue net zero, the more we're getting poorer, the harder it is to grow our economy, and it's the least well off, the lowest paid who suffer the most. And that's why we are now the real party of the workers, whereas frankly the Labour Party are obsessed with net zero. They're what I call the cafe latte Labour Party.
So if you believe that climate change, man-made climate change, is real and dangerous, and that everybody around the world needs to do their bit to stop it, don't vote for Reform UK.
Look, man-made emissions is part of climate change. But my point is you adapt to it using technology smartly. What you don't do is impoverish a nation whilst the rest of the world is carrying on, and we're getting poorer as other people are getting richer. And big corporations are making fortunes at the expense of ordinary people here in the UK. That is not sensible. And we've got to have the courage to call it out and say, yes, use technology, but make it affordable, make it sensible in a timely basis. What's going on at the moment is not affordable, it's not sensible, and it's not going to help.
I've been looking at the polling of Reform UK supporters at the moment. It's very interesting. They really, really hate the Conservative Party, and they strongly dislike the Labour Party as well. That suggests to me that it's going to be very, very difficult to have any kind of merger or reverse takeover between the parties after the election. You are on different sides.
Different sides to the Labour Party,
to the Tory Party.
I think
you're not going to merge with the Labour Party, obviously. So, but there has been a discussion about your relations with the Tories.
We are a fast-growing, distinct political force that is what everybody is talking about up and down the country. We're going to exceed the poll ratings. We're going to surprise everybody on the night of July the 4th. We're very excited by this progress, and that's because we've got common sense policies. We tell it as it is. And we are helping the least well off, the lowest paid in society with our plans. And I appreciate the establishment and the mainstream media doesn't like it. But that's actually how democracy works. Rather than trying to call people sort of deniers and suppress debate and all of that, much better to have a proper, open, transparent discussion.
Well, we are having that right now. I hope you'd agree. I'm
very grateful for.
I was asking about your attitude to the Conservatives because Nigel Farage said earlier on that he could see himself running to be Prime Minister at the next general election, and he said in the past that he would favour some kind of reverse takeover or a realignment of the right. And I'm wondering what your view is about some kind of agreement going forward with whatever's left of the Conservative Party.
Well, as Nigel says, there has to be a realignment of the right because we're attracting lots of support. We're talking about things that people would traditionally talk about as centre-right parties. The Conservative Party has basically given up. They're now basically a combination of social democracy or socialism, favouring high taxes, mass immigration, and big state spending. So, look, there's some very philosophical differences between large chunks of the Conservative Party. Let's see what happens. Let's see how many seats we get. Let's see what's left of them.
Sure.
And
okay.
Look, but competition's a good thing. And if that means that they disappear, they disappear.
Competition is absolutely a good thing. Let me ask you about one other policy area, which is what you say on Stop the Boats. You'd say you do that in 100 days by sending people back to France. My question is, how do you send them back to France?
You pick them up out of the boats, and instead of bringing them to Dover, you take them back to Dunkirk and Calais, which we're entitled to do under the UN Convention of the Law of Sea 1982 Maritime Treaty. The French also have legal obligations under that same treaty to do exactly that. It's what the Belgian authorities are doing, and guess what? It stopped the boats leaving the beaches of the Belgian shores. So that's what the French should be doing. If they fail in their obligations,
which they might well
then
do.
we are perfectly entitled to carry on, which they might well, in which case we must carry that out. That requires leadership and courage, which is completely, there is no sign of any of that from Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer. And, sometimes you're going to upset the human rights lawyers and some of the international groups and bodies, but that's what you've got to do.
What do you actually...
because they're not going to like it. They're going to say...
What do you do that they don't like?
They're not going to like it.
What are you going to do they don't like?
Take them back to France. That's what we're going to do. And it's also good for France because it'll reduce the magnet factor. The moment the business model stops... Here's the point. The best thing of all is that you stop people dying in the Channel. About 15 people that we know of have died this year. I think actually we should focus on stopping the deaths. Thousands of people are dying in the Mediterranean every day. If you pick up and take back, and everyone knows you're going to do that, all of a sudden the boats stop coming and people stop dying. And I think that's the right thing to do. And if that requires a bit of leadership and a bit of courage, then thank heavens that we've got the courage and the wherewithal to do so and to say so.
The French don't want them say, and they don't want to go back to France. As you approach the French coast, as you approach the beaches, do you just chuck them in the water?
I don't be ridiculous, Andrew. No, you take them back to the ports in France, and we will be allowed to
and they don't let. I'm sorry to jump in. And they don't let you dock. The French won't let you dock. ?
Well, then we've got an international standoff and there's going to be a row. But sometimes you have to have a row to get stuff done and to make things happen. You cannot just say we're going to keep letting people leave the beaches and keep dying. That is unacceptable. And if we have to have a row with the French, let's have a major row with the French and sort this out and stop people dying and stop the magnet effect through France. You need joint processing centres in northern France that process these people within a couple of weeks, have a week for an appeal, and then the vast majority who would be rejected would be returned from where they came. That's what leadership is about. That will stop this whole crisis It'll help everybody across the European nations. And frankly, I think it's right that we lead the way on this.
Have a major row with the French. I think I've just given you your next election poster. Richard Tice, thank you very much indeed for talking.